Hello, Albana Brioni here, Executive Coach for Generative Intelligence. With me, my Canadian colleague Alain Leolandri, founder of Wellness Conscience. We had the great pleasure of speaking with Mr. Robert Dilts about a topic of acute interest to business leaders. Robert is an internationally respected leader, trainer, and consultant in the field of leadership and generative change. He is a pioneer in the field of neurolinguistic programming, a discipline that has profoundly shaped and enlightened leadership training and communication. He is the co-author of Dilts Strategy Group, a co-founder and chairman of the International Association of Generative Change, and the principal author of more than 20 books on developing, expressing, and celebrating the best of human potential. In this exclusive interview that he had the generosity to grant us, we will talk about conscious leadership. What is it? Why is it needed now more than ever? And how is it helping us with the complex change challenges laying ahead of us? With this, I welcome Robert into the conversation. Welcome, Robert.
Pleasure and an honor to be with you, of course. Yes, I'm very excited. I'm really interested and anticipating what we will, or our conversation. I'm sure it's going to be very rich.
Alain and myself have been working for quite a while on different perspectives of conscious leadership. And of course, we have been very attracted by the work that you have done on conscious leadership, not only the book, but the real work on the ground. So we thought we would want to pick your brain to understand how you see that kind of leadership to start with. Maybe you want to delve initially into conscious leadership, what it is, and what is the making of a conscious leader.
We're speaking of two words here. There's conscious and there's leadership. So maybe it's important to sort of start with the foundation, which is leadership. So what is leadership, and then what is conscious leadership? And I've been studying leadership for over 40 years, so probably close to 45 years now. And I've also been a leader of a number of different organizations, of my NLP University, of the International Association of Generative Change, but also other different kinds of companies and my Dilts Strategy Group. But I did spend a lot of time both doing specifically modeling of effective leadership, and then what we call this, success factor modeling, where we're looking at what are some of the differences that we would say that differences that make a difference in an effective team or organization or a group. And, obviously leadership is a central aspect of that. And especially during times that we've been going through in the past several years, where you have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of disruption, a lot of change, that's where we know that we need leadership the most. That's where people experience the felt need for leadership. So what is it that we want when we need leadership, or when we want to show leadership? So for me, the foundation of leadership comes down to four basic, we could say competences, four basic pillars. And these have to do with the meaning of leadership. I always like to sort of look at a word and look at, well, where does it come from? What does it actually imply? And the word leader, or leadership from English, goes back to early English word, lethon. And lethon, interestingly, it doesn't mean power, it doesn't mean control, it doesn't mean hierarchy. It means to go. So if you lead, you're going, and you've got to go somewhere. So to lead is to, we're going to go somewhere, and hopefully go somewhere better, or go somewhere where we're able to thrive and, to become more enriched, etc. And to go, you need, to go anywhere, you need two fundamental things. The first is a direction. You don't have to know your destination to go. I can go without knowing where I'm going to end up, but I need to have a direction. If I don't have any direction to go, I'm not going to go anywhere. Secondly, you need energy. If you don't have energy, you're not going anywhere. No energy, no go. So the two basic things then we would say that every leader needs to be able to fundamentally do is to show a direction and then to provide energy or to bring energy or to inspire energy. So the four things that I say that would go with that, and this is the other aspect of it, is that leadership is generally about going first, not last, not in the middle, but when you lead, you are going first. So we say that the most effective leaders do these four things. First is they act as an example, right? They show the way first by being the example, not by telling other people what to do, not by commanding, not by threatening, not by reinforcing, but by going first. And then as they go and they provide the example, they also need to communicate the direction. We would say communicate a vision. What is it that we are trying to get to? Where is it that we are trying to go, even if we don't know all the details? So be an example, express a vision, or at least a direction and an intention. And then obviously this is where then energy comes in. They've got to be able to inspire others, right? To bring energy to others. Now, of course, throughout history, there are multiple ways of doing that. You can do it through aggression, through threat, through punishment. You can try to force people, but the most effective and sustainable leadership comes from inspiring people who want to join you to go towards the vision. We want to go there. So the fourth part then of any leadership, no matter what kind it is, would be to encourage team cooperation. Because you don't go by yourself, right? The whole idea of leading is that you're leading others, so you need to inspire others, and then to encourage and to, help to organize, let's say, cooperation. So we'd say that's what all leaders do. Okay, I've got to be the example. I've got to, express the vision. I've got to, show or at least indicate where we're trying to go. I've got to inspire or bring some kind of energy, some kind of movement, and then encourage cooperation. So now what does conscious leadership do? What does consciousness add to that basic formula? Well, for me, consciousness has to do with awareness, obviously. So when we're more conscious, we're more aware. The first sort of measure of consciousness is how much awareness does the leader have. And if you take these different dynamics that we're talking about, be an example, how much awareness of myself do I have? How much self-leadership can I actually, manage? I was actually, interestingly, just the last 2 days was giving a course on conscious leadership and resilience, conscious leadership, generative change and resilience. The idea of generative change is doing something new. And one of the key things we were saying is that all leadership starts with self-leadership. If you can't lead yourself, you pretty much are not going to lead anybody else. If I can't get myself to do something, I'm probably not going to be able to get anybody else to do something. So that's this first stage of self-awareness. Then if we think about the vision, where is it that we're trying to go? This is the next place that awareness becomes absolutely essential. And we were comparing different types of leaders. For example, you can look at leaders of very bureaucratic organizations to somebody like an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. When we say conscious leadership, no leader is perfect. We're not talking about, perfection.
Right.
And in fact, you can always increase your consciousness. That will be a never-ending, challenge to any leader. But by this, we mean how much awareness of the ecosystem that I am interacting with am I able to hold? And as I'm making decisions, where we see the biggest disasters, both for companies, for teams, but also for the ecosystems that they're involved in, is where you have short-sighted, narrow-minded, rigid. These are the opposite of conscious leadership, right? Narrow-minded, rigid, short-sighted, sort of arrogant, narcissistic. You wouldn't say a narcissistic person is a conscious leader. So why? Because their awareness is not for this system, you could say, that they're serving. And now this is so key when we start thinking of some of the big challenges that we meet in our world today, like, climate change and sustainability, and the challenges that we have with things like international conflicts, etc. Is I've got to be able to somehow hold a whole on, and whole on is a term that just simply means every whole is part of a bigger whole. It's made up of other wholes, but it's part of a bigger whole. And so if we simply put all of our attention and our focus, our identification, if you will, with one part of that, that easily begins to create disconnection, conflict, problems with other parts of the system. The challenge of consciousness today is, it used to be, I wouldn't have to think more than my own village, because we didn't even know much about it, and that didn't really impact anything in my village, didn't really have much impact on others. And even in the early days of city states, and then you have states and you have countries, and now we have a whole interconnected global system where, I would say probably even 20 or 30 years ago, what's happening in Ukraine right now might not have really, it would have had some effect on people. They might have been worried about it. But right now we see it has a global impact, and there's a global attention. So you can't take actions today, especially significant actions, that do not impact, have an impact on the whole system. There was the old saying, think globally, act locally. So I've got to be able to think globally so that when I act, that action is in some kind of alignment, in some kind of harmony. And this is not just to be altruistic. This is to be absolutely practical.
Yeah.
Because today, we saw from the pandemic, everything is connected. Something happens in one part of the world and it's going to spread all over the world, and as an interconnected world that we have today. So this requires leaders to upgrade, if you will, their level of consciousness to include all of that. And now the challenge is trying to do that through the traditional methods of what you might call left brain, linear, logical reasoning, which you need, but it's not enough. It's not enough. You need to engage other intelligences, other forms of awareness, not just verbal, cognitive, linear awareness. But this is where things like, emotional intelligence comes in, or, systemic intelligence comes in, systemic thinking. So this is what I would say is the conscious leaders are the ones who are able to hold these larger dynamics in place and then take strategic steps, knowing that each step we take is going to have an impact, but it's also going to have a reverberation back on us. We are going to make a difference in what we do, and that difference is eventually going to either create opportunities or create problems for us.
Yeah.
And so it's like a much more complicated chess game, where you've got to be anticipating many moves ahead and anticipating many different players, let's say, many different stakeholders.
One thing that I've been looking closely recently is that concept of generative growth, what I call the quadruple bottom line growth in profit, growth in people, growth in planet, and growth in culture. And I believe that by having leaders having these ecosystem type of thinking from the basis of multiple intelligences, it is just the basis, fundamental to be able to address that generative growth, that multidimensional growth and well balance.
Absolutely, Albana. So you're pointing out something I think that perhaps is one of the big challenges of all leadership, but that's why you have to be conscious leaders, is you have multiple bottom lines, right? You don't just have one bottom line anymore. It's multiple bottom lines. It cannot just be profit. It's also got to be people. It's got to be planet. It's got to be culture. But the second point is you've also got more and more stakeholders to include in this. A lot of the old models of leadership, especially what you might call, the hierarchical forms, we've got these rigid systems. Those work fine when you have a simple, stable environment. But we don't have a complex, unstable environment today. You cannot do this. You cannot lead it based on these simplistic, hierarchical, rigid, predictable
linear
aspects. So you need the basic management strategy for complex, unstable systems is what's known as mutual adjustment, which means I've got to be constantly tracking what's happening in multiple reference points, and I've got to be taking actions that I have to track how those will impact in these multiple points. And then, also you're trying to anticipate, but you cannot predict in the sense of, I can't say with certainty that something is going to happen, in some kind of a relatively distant future, but we can sense trends. We can, one of Steve Jobs, who is, I wouldn't say was the most conscious leader, but I think he started a trend towards conscious leadership of looking to do something more than just make profit. I do think that there was an interest in these multiple bottom lines. But one of the things that he said is he was using a metaphor of ice hockey, where there's a puck, and he said, you can't skate to where the puck is now. You've got to skate to where it's going to be. Now, there's many players out there, so what you're trying to do is to anticipate, where is it going next? Where is it going next? And I think that's another one of these key qualities of conscious leadership. And what I was saying to this business school group is that this is a combination of some type of path building, but also a lot of flexibility for spontaneity. Because if you don't allow the spontaneity, you're trapped, right? You're stuck. So this is the other thing than conscious leadership. Yeah, I've got to have a plan. I have to have a direction. I've got to have a sense of where I'm going and what kind of steps will take me there. Yeah. But then, just like we experienced in the past 2 years, when you have global pandemics, well, I've got to. I don't give up. I don't give up the direction. I don't give up the vision. But I've got to adjust the strategy moment by moment. So I think one of the things that I would say that effective leaders, and especially conscious leaders, do is you're very committed to the vision, but very flexible about the strategy.
Right.
And I remember one leader said to me, we never change the vision, but we change the strategy every time there's new information.
Well, what I was looking at also recently is those different models of leadership and measurements of different kind of leaderships, and they seem to have, although they give different names, but they seem to go in the same direction, that we've got kind of solution-oriented leaders, best practice-oriented leaders, like transformational leaders, and then global leaders, and the alchemists. And they're more ecosystem oriented. So the multiple systems, they are oriented on the needs and desires and orientations of the multiple stakeholders. And it seems like those global leaders and these alchemist type of leaders count for about 3 to max 5% of a total leadership population. And I was wondering, is that more a matter of personality? Is that more a matter of mindset? Is that a matter of, let's say normal distribution? So what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's one of the most important and intriguing questions in leadership. There's always been that question in leadership is, are you born leaders or are you made leaders? And it's, nature, nurture. And I think obviously the truth is it's somewhere in between, right? If you look at athletics and who are the top 5% of the athletes, on the one hand, there are obviously people who are born with some kind of talent, but if you have talent that you do not refine, they're not going to become a champion, right? You can have a lot of talent, but if that talent is not supported, it's not coached, it's not, as I was saying, well refined, it doesn't mature. And at the same time, you can take somebody who doesn't have so much talent by giving them a lot of support, by giving them the right mindset, they can improve, they can make sometimes quantum leaps. So it's clearly a matter of both. I've been very intrigued, in my whole work with success factor modeling, because all of the top leaders that I look at, certainly you do not find a single background profile, nor do you find a single personality profile. However, there is a common mindset. Now that mindset, if you have some other factors, that mindset can take you farther than it might take somebody else. Mindset's like the software of a machine. The hardware and some other things will determine how well that software can function. But I recently wrote an article, a success factor modeling article on Oprah Winfrey, who is, she's a talk show diva, but she then moved to being a media mogul. And she was not only was she the first woman billionaire, she was the first African-American woman billionaire. If you look at her history, she was born to an unwed mother in poverty. So she was sexually abused and was pregnant by the time she was 14, had lost the child in birth, and then grew up the rest of the time with her supposed father in a ghetto. So this is not the profile of who you would think would become the first billionaire. So it's like this person was not given, the start. This was not like the child of a millionaire or something. Right. And she says something very interesting. She says the most important discovery of all time is the fact that changing your mindset can change your future. That directly, changing your mindset, changing your attitude can change your future. And I think there is no question about that. There's just no question about that. Now, how far can that take you? Of course, there's other factors, but that's got to be one of the most significant factors. When I look at what you were calling the alchemists, to me, some of these alchemists today, and again, I'm not holding them out as an ideal, because it's not about personality, right? I'm not saying these are ideal personalities. But if you look at somebody like Elon Musk or Richard Branson, what stands out about them? If you look at Richard Branson, he started with a record store and then went to airlines. There's no connection between selling records and running an airline. And now, the Virgin Group has 400 different companies. So this is not about content. This is not about some kind of specific expertise. Similarly, you look at Elon Musk, again, we're not talking about somebody who is the most gifted in all areas, but, his PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, these industries are quite different. So what is it that unites these alchemists? They have this capacity to be able to have a kind of a Midas touch. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the personality of Richard Branson and the personality of Elon Musk, they're not at all alike. They're like worlds apart. So what is it? What is the difference that makes the difference? And I think it is that notion of mindset, that regardless of our inborn gifts and talents, regardless of our upbringing, it is possible to develop qualities of mindset that will take us to a next level in whatever we are doing. And what the alchemists are able to do is to reach this level of mindset that is more and more, you could say disconnected in one way, but I would say more and more inclusive in another way, of contents. It's not about this content, that content, this industry, that thing. It's about, and this is what leadership is about, right? Leadership is not about the content. It's about the process. Many very successful leaders came from an industry different than the one that they're known for. So it's leadership is not about the expertise of the industry that I'm in. It's about these fundamental, processes. And I would say that boils down to particular qualities of mindset.
I know Robert, that you are working passionately about increasing and expanding the layer of leadership that is oriented towards conscious leadership. So having more of this kind of alchemists being present in our society today and tomorrow. So what's next in the work that you are doing?
To me, one of the definitions of the alchemist leaders is that the alchemist leaders are leaders of other leaders. The regular leaders are leaders of followers, right? So if you want to lead followers, you go get sheep. But the alchemists are leaders of other leaders. They're meta leaders. And so I think, when we think of where we go next, it's kind of expanding this, that when we speak about this idea of a holon, it's being able to bring this, to be able to spread this through some of the very interesting developments in technology, to be able to leverage more. I mean, we were already speaking about the pandemic and what's happening in Ukraine and these other things. We are extremely interconnected. And here, I think, is where we as an individual begin to become limited, meaning I'm one person. And even though I can achieve potential acts of genius, I need to recognize where are my limitations, and then how can we begin to expand those. Mm-hmm. So there's something that you might, we sometimes would call like I don't know what you call it, like a cognitive prosthesis. I mean, a cognitive leverage. Mm-hmm. Steve Jobs used to use this metaphor that he said, if you look at a human being as and their athletic abilities, and you look at what they can do physically and versus how much energy they burn and they don't measure up very well to a lot of other creatures on the planet. They don't, like you can't run like a cheetah. We use a lot more energy than a condor or something does. So, but when you put a human being on a bicycle, they suddenly move way up. What they can accomplish and the amount of energy they put in suddenly shifts. And he used to say that, well, the personal computer is like a bicycle for the mind. Well, I would say, yeah, why stop at a bicycle? But this is what I think is happening now as we begin to talk about artificial intelligence. But I'm actually in a community where we're actually looking at, and I wouldn't even call it artificial consciousness, but you might call it extended consciousness. So people talk about artificial intelligence. What really is not artificial, it's machine intelligence. Machines are limited depending upon how we design those machines. But if you look at what's happening in things like, quantum computing, what's happening in virtual reality and augmented reality, we're going to see shifts in what's possible, like we saw when the internet came around. And suddenly, that changed everything. We're going to see in the near future extremely disruptive technologies that hopefully are not going to simply keep ruining the environment more, disconnecting people from themselves and each other more, but are actually hopefully going to be able to put us more in connection with ourselves, with each other. And I think that's where some of these emerging technologies come in. We need to look at and also contribute to the development of technologies. They even say we as humans, we are actually in some ways influencing our own evolution because of our ability to, develop technology. No other animal can evolve itself, can create the conditions under which it's going to evolve. We can. And so we need to realize that. And I think, so for me, then conscious leadership has to include the role of technology, in particular, things like, artificial intelligence, in the development and in the visions and in the forms of cooperation. If we talk about encouraging cooperation, we've got to engage those, because we can actually increase that. One of the things we're doing right now through Zoom, that's become so commonplace and so much better in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So now we can be in different places of the world like we are, and it's natural, and it's not stilted and rigid and strange. We can exchange really insightful ideas. We can inspire passion in each other. It's not like, okay, the screen disconnects us, the screen can connect us. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to be looking more and more to.
Absolutely. Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Robert. Alain, do you have any other areas that you might want to explore?
As we think about leadership and change, there are different levels of change, right? There's change in the environment. And of course, that's where all leadership is ultimately grounded, is in concrete, change. I remember when I first was getting in studying leadership, one of the leaders that really inspired me the most said two things that stuck with me for all these now many decades later. First thing he said was, leadership is creating a world to which people want to belong. And that means it's a world in which they can thrive, but also to which they can contribute. And so I think this is a foundation for leadership. How do we create a world? Now, that world doesn't have to be the whole world. It doesn't have to be the globe. The way that my company is running is the way the world would run. The way that I treat myself, I'm a world. My team is a world. My organization is a world. So we want to create a world to which people want to belong. The second thing that he said that I thought was really important was that leaders communicate with other leaders that create, you accomplish something, and you do that in the environment. It's not just a dream, it's not just a wish, it's not just a boast, it's an accomplishment. And then you anchor that accomplishment in a success story, right? What is it? What did you do? It's not just that you did it, there is a path there. But I think that's the environment part. Obviously, to create accomplishments, we need to have the supporting actions. You don't make an accomplishment without an action. And so there's obviously the leadership of actions, that is leading people as to sort of what to do. Especially when we talk about this in a complex, unstable environment. This is the idea of mutual adjustment. I can't predict the action. I can't pre-plan the action. The action is going to have to come out of this, some kind of strategic or mental map, mental model that I'm using. So then there's the sort of leading of the mind. So there's mindset leaders, right? There's action-oriented leaders, which is great, but if you lead the mind, then people are going to be able to determine their own actions. And that's the first step of, meta leadership, of leading leaders. But then we have that notion of, and the other level is not just of the competency and how you do it and the mental map, it's the motivation. Mm-hmm. I lead people's motivation. And that's where really the energy comes in, the inspiration. And if you think of what's happening in Ukraine right now, and you think of why did Russia why everybody thought Russia would take over in a week or something. Why did that not happen? It's because people, they don't have the same belief. There's a different sense of values, a different sense of belief that's driving you. Mm. And so motivation makes a huge difference, and it's a key part of mindset. So there are certain leaders, and again, you see this with military leaders, that are able to influence people's motivation. And this is by appealing to their deep values and beliefs. And we would say these are inspirational leaders. Then you get to the point where you have people at this level of identity. So it's because our identity is, when we say I believe or I think or I do, there's the I, there's this bigger I that's doing it. And this is where you get this sense of leaders who are able to really bring the best version of somebody out, we say. It's like it's not just this value or this capability, it's I can bring the best version of this person out. And that's what we would tend to call a charismatic leader. Mm-hmm. And the idea of, charisma, the original meaning of charisma comes from Greek. Charism is your gift. So charismatic leadership means you're bringing out the gift, right? What is the unique thing that this particular individual has, because people can share the same beliefs, they can share the same capabilities, they can share the same actions, but it's this identity, it's this unique aspect of the identity that gives those the specific flavor. And so finally, you have the very, as you go beyond the tip of that pyramid, you get to this area of purpose, or what you could call a sense of a larger spirit, which means that I am part of something beyond myself. Again, this idea of a whole-on. But this is not an intellectual, it's not intellectual. It's where people literally will sacrifice their life. Why would you ever, would be any possibility you would want to sacrifice your life? It's because I'm part of something beyond me, which is more important than me. And that's what I think the real transformational leaders are able to inspire in others. And again, you do it starts with example. It starts with this sense of knowing it deeply in yourself. So I would say then, the more conscious a leader is, the more of these levels of this pyramid they are able to work with at every point in time. We call it this quality of alignment. So a conscious leader is an aligned leader, but everybody has blind spots. So part of conscious leadership is also recognizing I've got my blind spots, So if we think about, what it said over the entrance to the oracle at Delphi, thousands of years ago, know yourself, right? Know yourself.
Know yourself.
And this idea that the more you know that you don't know. It's also one of the great growth opportunities of conscious leadership is the more conscious you are, the more you realize how not conscious you are and how much more you could be. And I think that's our challenge today. And our challenge is to mirror to each other how to do this without, and I think this is maybe another thing I would say that's super important about conscious leadership. The opposite of conscious leadership is divisive, judging, criticizing, putting down of others, was what we see happening so much. That's what creates war, right? That's what increases war. That's what creates the political dysfunctions that we have today. And it comes from on the one hand, it comes from a rigid identification with a subsystem in the whole-on that is now going to be against the rest. And, so I think conscious leadership is inclusive. It doesn't mean it's permissive. I think that's important. It's not altruistic and it's not permissive, but it's inclusive. It's wise. You need to be wise. And I think the one other thing I would say about consciousness is that, when I've, in all the work that I've done in the many years that I spent coaching, many well-known leaders, and others, and teaching all over the world, I began to realize that experience is not enough. People have all kinds of experiences in their life. It's not enough. You have to learn from the experience. Having the experience isn't enough. I think it was Henry Ford that said, the only real mistake is not learning from your mistakes, But how do you learn? Learning, it comes from reflecting mindfully on the experience, right? Reflecting on my experience. That's what modeling is. That's what success factor modeling is.
Right.
It's reflecting and holding that question, what's the difference that makes a difference? So again, I think conscious leaders are, they're inclusive, but they're also, and it's why they can produce profit as well as planet, as well as people, is because you become more and more aware of what are the things that make the difference. What is going to actually make a difference? It's not just dreaming, it's not just wishing, it's not altruistic thinking. It's the knowledge of that if I poke here, something is going to happen there.
Right.
And if I poke there, something is going to happen. And that's what you see. That's what the alchemists do. They know the chemistry. So I guess I would just say that. So the more conscious you are, also the more of these higher levels you include You don't just include the where and when something should happen, but it's the what, it's the how, it's the why, it's the who, it's the for whom. One interesting thing that I find, and this goes back to the notion of personality, I did a program a number of years ago that was on conscious leadership, and I co-did it with a person who was an Enneagram specialist. And I know Enneagram is all about categories of personality. But as we did this program, one of the things that became more and more obvious was that, yeah, people start off really different, but the more and more conscious they are, the more and more they begin to become the same, think the same, do the same. So a conscious 2 is very much like a conscious 5, or a conscious 9, because it's the consciousness that gives you the freedom, that gives you the understanding, but also the freedom of these more rigid aspects. And so that's where the alchemy comes in.
It sounds like if we want to have a world where there is more parity, more equity, by raising that level of consciousness, we will come closer to each other.
Yes, absolutely. It's about equity, but it's also about connectivity. And it's through that equity that we realize that we can do more. That's the thing that's interesting. It's not about lowering, you're not trying to lower it, you're raising.
Exactly. You're bringing everybody to a higher level. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's how you reach the equity. I remember during one of the previous administrations, they had this thing called No Child Left Behind, which was in trying to reach equity, but what they did was lower the standards to the lowest person. It's not even about the standards, it's about how do you support the people in their own way of learning, in their own needs, to be able to, again, reach the best version of themselves. And I think that's where the equity comes in. When we are all the best version of ourselves, it's magical. It's magical.
We become a pull-up factor. A beautiful world to live in.
We were talking in this class about, the difference between this idea of dreamer as in dreamer realist critic versus staying a dreamer just in some utopian fantasy. No, you've got a dream, then you move to the realist. And this is another thing I think all conscious leaders are aware of. They dream, they're not afraid to dream. I mean, if you look at, the alchemist, I mean, and if I don't know if my examples are right, but if you look at somebody like a Elon Musk or a Richard Branson, whether you like them or not, they're not afraid to dream. But they're also not just dreamers, right? There's this realist function, and there's also this embracing of the critic. And I remember Elon Musk said, there's nothing more valuable than a well thought out criticism. So I think that's the other thing. It's like, okay, we know we need these multiple perspectives. All of these perspectives are going to, again, help us to really reach this next level.
So what I get out of that, Robert, is that there is, of course, a huge potential of multiplying the alchemists in our society.
Yes.
We say, part of it can be talent born, but there's a lot of it that comes out of learning and practicing and opening up our minds, increasing level of wisdom, and being pull-up factors for those that are ready to embrace that increase of consciousness.
Absolutely. Well said.
Robert, I will ask you, do you think that if you put artificial intelligence, that will give space to the leader to put more intuition in this field?
That's a great question, Alan. And I think a couple of things that I learned a long time ago. If you think about the most fundamental models of leadership, if you look at, situational leadership, the most fundamental model is that leaders have to manage task and relationship. The sweet spot is where you do both. Now, here's the great thing I learned a long time ago. The more that the task is, addressed and, supported, the more you can support the relationship. And so I think part of what artificial intelligence does, if we say it's artificial, what the missing part of it is probably the humanity, relational part that machines are not designed. That's not their design, but they're great at the task. So if the machines support us more and more and more and more in the task, then our attention can go more and more and more towards other things. That's where then we can keep our consciousness on the whole on, rather than, okay, what's the step we're supposed to do and what's happening here and now what's the next da. Okay, so what machines can do is basically they can replicate our linear cognitive conscious mind, which is what we're saying is, yeah, well, that's the least important part ultimately of conscious leadership. So we've got to use these other parts of our nervous system and these other parts of our mind. One of the companies that I'm on the board of here in Paris is a company called Chance, and they are looking to democratize coaching. And they have a whole system where you start with artificial intelligence to gather a bunch of information, to synthesize together all these different aspects of a person, their history, that would just be mind-boggling to a human. And they've got all of that so that when you get there to coach them, it's already synthesized all of these things for you. And you see this happening in medicine when you go to the doctor, how these things might be converging. Whereas the doctor, if they just meet you, they don't know all that. And I think artificial intelligence will keep, expanding. That's what I was meaning by this kind of cognitive prosthesis. I have the computer do the things that I don't like to do, that are difficult for me to do, that would be complicated to keep track of, but that's what it does. Then that allows me the freedom and the focus to be able to look at the other things. So in this Chance thing, you have this interesting dynamic between the virtual coach and the live coach. And it's a really incredible, I think it's a good model for, I think, how leadership is going to be emerging. That you'll have, in a sense, the virtual leader and then the actual leader, and they will be working in partnership. As our technologies develop, as you start getting more practical possibilities for something like quantum computing, there you're going to be able to, have a whole other quantum leap of the ability to, track, organize, synthesize things so that we don't have to do all of that. And that's given to us. We can focus on what we do the best. And again, that's where I think, Alain, where you were saying intuition comes in. And what do we mean by intuition? It's all of the other intelligences than our cognitive, conscious, linear intelligence, which means, our emotional intelligence, our what we call, our sense of our field intelligence, our somatic intelligence. So that's where we shine. Computers don't have that, but we have that. So then we work in partnership with the technology. It's not just the bicycle for the mind, it's the spaceship for the mind, or I don't know, whatever metaphor we're going to use.
Yeah. I am very happy that we get to this fantastic journey also to the future of coaching, not only of the leadership, but also of coaching.
And I think, I think that leadership and coaching overlap, because more and more we see that one of the key competences of good leaders is coaching. That a leader who is not able to coach is a limited leader.
That's right.
That coaching, we say in the conscious leadership, one of the parts of the conscious leadership model is that empowering is part of it, coaching is a part of it, sharing is, and stretching is. So leaders have to be able to do all of those things to lead. Yeah, I think that they share a common future in some ways. They share certainly an overlapped future.
We talk about conscious leadership, but we talk also about executive coaching, or we talk about business coaching. Right. And
yes.
There is of course a tendency of putting leadership coaching a little bit separate from the executive and the business coaching, where the way I see it is that it is definitely a part of it. Because as an executive, as a business leader, as a business owner or a business manager, you still have a function as a leader.
Yes. With this company Chance I was talking about, they started with sort of placing people in companies, so kind of like executive placement, but they wanted to move also to bring coaching more to human resources within companies. And one of the things that we were saying is that I think what you might say is the difference between a typical, let's say executive coach and a leadership coach has to do precisely with how much of that pyramid you include in the coaching. A lot of coaching stops at competency. It doesn't go to values and motivation and belief. It doesn't go to identity, meaning role and mission. It doesn't go to purpose. Whereas if you're going to be a leader, you gotta, I mean, if you're going to be a good leader, if you're going to be a conscious leader, certainly you have to have that. And I think my book is called From Coach to Awakener, that I think that a full coach, like we call it a coach with a capital C, means you're coaching the whole person. A small C coach might be, okay, I'm going to coach somebody to do this job, or I'm going to coach somebody to, just be a manager. But a full coach is coaching you on all these levels. And I think that's going to also ultimately be the future of coaching. It's going to be big C coaching, I call it, meaning it's you're creating a path for the evolution of that person. Again, it ultimately comes down to being the best version of yourself that you can be. And as you evolve, that evolves. And as conditions evolve, that evolves. So I think this is what we're sort of, where leadership and coaching converge, especially conscious leadership. I'm trying to create the world in which people want to belong and in which they can become the best version of themselves. So.
Fantastic. Robert, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for generosity of sharing your thoughts and making that available to us and to the audiences that will read us soon.
My great pleasure. It was a lot of fun. And thank you to you both.
Absolutely.